Before we begin, thank you very much to Andrew M. for joining my Patreon campaign. Thank you so much for the support. Guys, this has been ridiculous. You know this has been ridiculous, right? I have had a shout out every day since the beginning of February, and it's still going. That is how insane you have been this year. It's not even that. It's so many people that are, and it's not even like the $1, $2 people signing up just to make me say a funny hee-hoo. No. It's the top tiers that are also like crowding the credits sequence at the end of the video. I just updated it. You'll see the new one. I had to start shrinking the text to fit every name. It's insane. And you really have no idea how much it helps me do what I am doing right now with the daily content. Thank you guys so much for allowing me to do this and for allowing me to keep going. Man. Okay, we got more Patreon stuff to talk about later on. We'll save it for another video. For now, we have to talk Autotroopers. So this is another entry into my ideas of like underused Transformer characters, because as much as we in the fandom kind of think of Autotroopers, because really like they're kind of the only like generic grunt soldier that the Autobots ever had. You know, we have Seekers, we have Reflectors, we have we have like things like Viacons, on the villainous side of things. But the good guys don't generally employ like generic body for their battles, like it does kind of feel like a Decepticon-ish thing. So yeah, it's actually pretty rare. The Autotrooper is one of the very few we have. Junkions in a pinch, but they're all different from each other. As far as just generic soldiers, it's pretty much just down to the good old Autotrooper. It's kind of the one thing out of KISS players that we've actually accepted into the Transformers lore as a whole. But when you think about it, they really haven't been utilized that often. You get to see them in, you get to see them in the original fiction, which we don't talk about. And there is, of course, animated, which is one of the few times where they're having like an actual depiction. So as unique as they are, you really don't get a whole lot of time with them. So I kind of sat down and thought about it. Now that everyone's talking Autotroopers again, thanks to the next Target 4-pack of troop builders, what can we do? What can we do with the humble Autotrooper? So let's consider this. So for starters, we throw all of this out. All of this. We throw all of this out. We get rid of it. Gone. There's only one element we're going to keep, and we will get to it in due time. But for now, just know this ain't happening. This part ain't happening. I'm still trying to figure out how to do a KISS players video without being demonetized, by the way. If you don't know KISS players, that's about everything you need to know. So, let's stick these into semi-G1 fiction somewhere. I'm thinking more on the IDW side of things, maybe a little bit of the G1 cartoon, depending on how you want to play the fiction. When I do these scenarios, it's mostly coming up with completely new universes. It doesn't really stick to any one, but we're going to borrow elements. So, for instance, in my verse, we're going to start the Autotroopers as something that came across during Zeta Prime's time in charge of the Autobots. Now, if you don't know Zeta Prime from the IDW books, he's as bad as he looks. He puts on a front of getting rid of what was originally called disposable class citizens, the functionist elements that had previously existed in the Autobot ranks, and in Cybertron in general, and instead, like, he was all about like freeing them and all that. Except it's kind of a front. Instead of being open about it, it's just kind of a thing that happens. So it's still a thing. He just obfuscates it. So we're gonna kind of play into that a little bit here. Autotroopers begin as mass-produced soldiers commissioned by Zeta Prime under the guise of creating these nearly blank robots, completely autonomous, hence the name Autotrooper, to replace any of these disposable class citizens so they don't have to endanger their sparks out on the battlefield, we're going to send what is essentially walking drones out there to do it for you. The truth behind Autotroopers, however, is they are fully functioning and even sentient transformers. That's, technically the easiest thing they can do. The difference is they all have the same similar programming, and the programming is locked, so that they cannot really deviate from it. They all have a singular goal, they all have a singular mission, and that is the defense of the Autobot way of life. Now, of course, in this situation, these would be built in response these guys would be built in response to the growing number of Seekers that the Decepticons are employing. Now, we know the classic Seekers of 3 that Megatron keep around, and the 3 Coneheads that came later. But if we look through G1 fiction, we know, of course, there's tons of them. There's a bunch that appear in Episode 1 that never show up again. There's the Rainmakers that appear in Divide and Conquer. Amongst all these other numerous repaints, recolors, and whatnots that you see all throughout Transformers history, there's tons of it. Traditionally, you're always going to be looking at Seekers when you talk about G1 generic grunt soldiers for the Decepticons. So in my fiction, the Autotroopers would be built in response to them. With Zeta basically believing that a lot of these skirmishes are below him, so he sends the Autotroopers to basically battle in his place. They don't need a general, they don't need anyone looking over them, they just need numbers. As long as Zeta is willing to throw enough numbers onto the battlefield, they end up winning. However, there is a shift to this. Something I played with here is the idea that originally Seekers were not flyers. In this generation, it is very much a means of one-upsmanship. And if we're talking something similar to the G1 cartoon fiction, then I always like the idea that the Decepticons do have a massive advantage in that they are the only ones that know how to fly. Whether that is in robot mode or the fact that many of their soldiers have aerial vehicle modes while the Autobots have sparingly few. So that was kind of the idea I played with here, that flight was an invention in order to gain an advantage over the Autobots. And once this advantage became a thing, the Autotroopers become outmatched very quickly. They cannot slow the Decepticons' advances at this point. They lose ground, they lose important places, and they start to be seen as ineffectual. Now, we know how the Autobot stuff works. They don't last long until we get to Optimus Prime. So once Zeta is out, Sentinel Prime takes over. Sentinel's not the greatest of person either. So to him, once he takes over, the Autotroopers at this point are fairly ineffectual. So he views them essentially as just failures. The production of new ones ends, and they are mostly allocated to different tasks. Some of the standouts might be set on security details, but for the most part, they get put in charge of menial tasks, cleaning up the battlefields, standard patrols, things like that. Anything that is deemed a suicidal mission, usually it's an Autotrooper that has to run it. Things like that. So things get really, really bad for the Autotroopers under Sentinel Prime, who much prefers sending living, free-thinking Autobots onto the battlefield in order to win fights. Granted, that's the traditional way of things, but in this case, there's a malice to it. Like we said, Sentinel's not the best guy, right? No. We have to wait until we get Optimus Prime in charge before we kind of do anything about the plight of the Autotrooper. So once Optimus Prime takes over, you have this entire sect of Autobots that are really treated like second-class citizens. And if you know anything about Orion Pax through some of the comic books coming up, that is one of the biggest things that he is against, the functionist system, which In this case, Zeta Prime claimed to do away with, but didn't, and now in this universe, Sentinel reinforced and made even worse. So, one of Optimus's first things, once he takes command of the Autobots and sees his, potential here, his first decree is essentially to open up the programming of the Autotroopers. So, rather than having the same singular mind, this one thing, follow orders, defend Cybertron, and nothing in their brain being allowed to think in any different directions, all of a sudden you've got thousands of these Transformers with their minds awakened. And now, of course, to start off with, they're mostly going to feel like they're all the same person. Most of them are going to be willing to and desire, most of them will want to rejoin the battlefield, of course, because that's their core and their natural programming. But in this situation, they are no longer sent out to battle on their own and just hopefully we have enough numbers to just overwhelm our target. Now they actually have leaders behind them. They have generals who are experienced, the likes of Cup, the likes of Ironhide, people that we see as veterans now in current Transformers fiction, which at the time were just getting their start as generals, so they get put in charge of these essentially, similar Autotroopers. But the longer we go with this, the more they will separate out. Like anytime, like any AI story, any like mass-produced robot story will eventually lead to them kind of having an awakening of sorts and figuring out that all of them like really have different ways that they can go and that they don't need to specifically be an Autotrooper anymore fighting on the front lines. They can make their own choices. They can decide the type of Autobot they are. So you'll start to have differences develop and you'll have these standouts that seem skill-wise far superior to the others, or personality-wise stand out a lot better. So you might see an Autotrooper, or someone with this, essentially like this design. Maybe they start to take their form, maybe they start to take their role as a protector of Cybertron a little bit more seriously. Maybe they're very serious about their job. Maybe they are very tactically minded and start standing out as something of a sub-commander on the field when Ironhide or Cup or some similar agent is not available. This is the Autotrooper that steps up, and he's starting to make a name for himself. What if we had an Autotrooper who decided to break away from the white and black color scheme and do a lot more talking than usual? He's more jovial, he's more friendly, he's not the biggest on fighting, he's good on a battlefield, but it's not where his heart is. His heart is in the speech. His heart is in speaking his mind, because of course he has now just realized that he's spent a few millennia not being able to speak his mind. So now that it is open and the thoughts are flowing free, he really wants to express all of these thoughts. Maybe there is the Autotrooper that feels like this strategy is a little dull. Maybe we need to twist things up. Maybe I need to be a little bit trickier on the battlefield. And then when I'm off the battlefield, there's some carnal pleasures to indulge in. Maybe a little bit of racing, a little bit of gambling. I'm allowed to have fun. I work hard on the battlefield. I'm the one throwing in all the tricks that win the day. I deserve some R&R when the fighting's over, right? Right. A lot are going to fall into things like this. And of course, they're naturally well programmed, so most of the time they're going to end up being an Autobot. Rare occasions, though, you're going to have a few that resent their time as Autotroopers. They're going to see it as enslavement. Even though there's a new regime that has freed their minds, they're still going to be resentful for the time they were under control, and they're probably going to end up on the Decepticon side of things. This is how you birth this entire generation of Autobots who kind of share this same design scheme, but have vastly different personalities. It is a lineage, as the Autotroopers individually develop, spread out, they take new colors, they take new personalities, they redesign themselves to express who they are, who they're becoming. So you have some that keep a similar body style, but have vastly different ideas as to how they perform, how colored they are. You might have some that completely retool and redesign themselves, but still carry a little bit of that original lineage. Think about how many Autobots throughout the years of Transformers have kind of that same design, you know? Like that chest is the front of the car, the legs are the rear of the car. They might flip forward, they might just extend down, but it is still the rear section of the car. So you think of designs like Jazz. Would Jazz have been from this lineage, or would he be a little bit different? You know, is he different enough to say he's from a side lineage, or he is not of the Autotrooper lineage, but he just happened to be similar in overall design? Things like that. So you start to have this like shared history between them, like a very distant brotherhood, and find out that, yeah, like a lot of these are kind of cut from the same cloth. You know, the same way all the Seekers eventually separate out from each other, but we know that they are constructed cold from the same generic body. So when we have so many Autobots like this, why not do the same? It seems to make sense. Now, by the time the Autobots and Decepticons, for the most part, leave to continue the battle on Earth, most of the Autotroopers would be gone. They had gone through so many different redesigns and reinventions that the ones who survived would be, at that point, unrecognizable. Completely new Cybertronians that you never knew were from the same batch from each other. But there's always an outlier, because rumor has it that Optimus Prime still has one in his employ. One that decided that who he was fine. He didn't need to branch out. He didn't need to become somebody else. He is an Autotrooper true and true. The Autotrooper. He has survived hundreds of thousands of conflicts, millions of years of war, and he was sent on some of the worst, most dangerous missions with the thought that he would not come back, and he did. Autotroopers were once a thing to disregard. They were mostly annoyances on the battlefield, but now there's only one left. And if he's survived this much, and he's seen this much combat and has this much experience under his belt, pray to Primus, you are not a Decepticon in his path. By the time the year 2003 or so is rolling around, the Earth at this point is starting to develop their own defenses for Decepticons or universal threats in general. That would be the EDC, which of course is the traditional birthplace of the Autotrooper in their original fiction. And when the humans need this defense for themselves, Optimus Prime can think of no one better than the Autotrooper to go to Earth and actually teach the humans what they need to know about defending themselves from Decepticons. Nobody at this point has seen more conflict from more variety of Decepticons than the Autotrooper has. He's their basis of knowledge. He's their basis for technology. He's the one telling them what they need to do in order to survive otherwise unsurmountable odds for a bunch of humans. And it's how the EDC grows and becomes an effective counterpart to the Autobots around the universe. And yeah, him and Marissa would probably get along pretty well. It's considering this is a very new thing for both of them. But a friendship is all it is. Don't get creepy about it. This ain't Kiss Players. That said, there's a weird thing about history. There's a very weird thing about history in that if you do not learn from it, you are doomed to repeat it. So, while Marissa is a great person to have in the EDC and a great partner for Autotrooper, and they've done a lot of good, both for humans and Autobots alike, there's going to be some in the EDC who really don't want to depend on a singular Autobot or any Autobots. They would want to defend themselves. And somewhere along the line, there might be a new generation of Autotrooper out there. Maybe this time Earthborn. And maybe the cycle continues again. But that's a completely different story. So there you go. that's my use for an Autotrooper. Let me know in the comments below what you thought. I love doing little story time stuff like this, and it felt apropos considering that seems to be the one everyone's hyped for out of that 4-pack. So, there's my Autotrooper story. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you next time.
I'm like, I think you guys got this. I will back away, and I will see you all later.
You've got this handled.
Alafi's like, really? You're not gonna help me? Like, it's fine now.
It's like these disgusting creatures breathing down my neck, and you're all just like, I believe in you. You got this.
All right, you seem to have this. 5 minutes.